Welcome to Forging the Future, Decarbonizing the Steel Industry, a Hatch podcast series. I'm your host, Thakshi Sachdeva, and invite you to join us on a journey through the challenges and innovations in iron and steel production. Discover how Hatch's century of expertise is shaping a sustainable future for the steel industry. Stay tuned as experts from Hatch share their insights on technology, market dynamics, and the path to decarbonization. In today's episode, we continue the conversation with two Hatch specialists, Matthew Cramer, Senior Principal based in Mississauga, Canada, and Sid Sengupta, Senior Principal Advisory, joining us from London, UK. Welcome to the show, Matt and Sid. It is a pleasure to have you two on board today.
Pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the conversation, Takshi.
Same here, Takshi. Been looking forward to the conversation with you.
It would be great if we can start with a quick introduction and sharing some of the exciting work you've been doing at Hatch in the steel industry.
Sure. So, as part of our role as advisors to the industry, Takshi, we've been, both Sid and I, and personally I've been involved heavily in trying to understand what the future might look for these organizations, how we can leverage both policy, consumer demand, as well as the capital frameworks available, so that we can help our clients really decarbonize. And steel is probably the most challenging and impactful of those sectors.
So thanks, Takshi. I think as part of my role here in Hatch, I'm mainly focused on strategy and diligent support for the steel industry. In particular, we help clients to look at what are the key issues challenging the industry and how they should go about solving it. And also, we help a lot of lenders looking at lending into the steel industry in terms of what the issues are with regards to lending and what are the risks associated with the lending. So that's what keeps me meaningfully employed for the last couple of years.
Looking at solutions and almost that silver bullet to decarbonize this industry that contributes to about 8% of the global GHG emissions. My question to you is, what are you seeing around you in the projects you've been working on today?
Great. Thanks, Takshi. So I think the first thing is that we've crossed the Rubicon, as they say, right? I think the first thing I'd like the readers and the listeners to understand is that we've really gone beyond deciding whether or not this is going to occur. Everybody is advancing towards a cleaner future and a decarbonized steel. And we're seeing the markets respond. I think what people are missing, and really what's being interesting, is coming to grips with the sheer scale of what this is going to do to both the industry and the society that's built around it. And I think Sid will certainly have some interesting views.
Absolutely, Matt. And I think you're right to say that the challenges of decarbonizing the steel industry has definitely grasped the attention of the leadership of the industry. It is certainly now the number one topic of the leadership. Blast furnace, which is the predominant route of steel making, is a very carbon-intensive process. So what we're seeing with the industry is that they are steadily moving towards DRI charged EAF-based steel making. And what is now catching the attention of the steel industry is technology options, supply of renewable energy, and hydrogen, where we think that the steel industry leadership is missing a very important topic, which is raw materials, both scrap and DR pellets. This is something that Matt and I are going to discuss at length through this podcast.
So picking up on what you just mentioned, Sid, I mean, we're seeing a shift in steelmaking going from blast furnace-based routes to more DRI and electrical furnaces in the future. I'm imagining this would create a fundamental shift in the raw material needs as well. Do you see any issues with that?
Yeah, look, I think Sid's hit the nail on the head, and one of our greatest concerns, Takshi, is just whether or not we're seeing the entire shift, right, throughout your entire value chain. And one of the areas that Sid mentioned, which we strongly believe people are overlooking, is just the supply of iron units to these new technologies. And I think given the scale, it's hard to grasp just how much of a change we're talking about. And Sid maybe would share some really interesting numbers to talk just how tectonic this is going to be.
Thanks, Matt. So let me set a context around the challenge we are talking about here. So Hatch has done some research looking at steel demand, the adoption of low emission technology, and what impact it makes on raw materials. And we are seeing some very revealing numbers coming out from this analysis. So let's see. So the model basically looks at steel demand from currently to about 2040. it assumes about roughly 10% increase in steel demand. There is an assumption that there will be a sharp correction in steel demand from China. If you then overlay this with a gradual adoption of low emission technology, and I'll speak about why we've assumed a gradual adoption of low emission technology, you then apply value in use of raw materials. The fundamental numbers we're getting from the raw material demand is quite revealing. Now, before I speak about numbers, the reason we assumed a very gradual adoption of raw material of low emission technologies is to see how much of an impact it will make on raw material demand. So assuming a very gradual uptake of low emission technology, we're seeing two things. One, for DR pellets, the increase in demand would be about roughly 200 million tons. And for scrap, it's around 230 million tons. Now, let me put some context around what 200 million tons of DR pellet means. If you look at the previous 17 years, the iron ore industry was able to come up with 100 million tons of DR pellets. And now the ask on the industry is double of that. So what the steel industry is asking the iron ore industry to do is to come up with double the amount that they did in the last 17 years. This is a huge ask and a very, very fundamentally difficult task for the iron ore industry.
I really like how you laid emphasis on tonnages as opposed to just the percentage change. I think it really puts into perspective how large the industry is and how big of a shift we are really trying to make here. So Sid, can you perhaps expand further on the approach that the steel producers of today should be taking to make this transition successful?
I think the steel industry leadership is very focused on technology options, supply of renewable energies and hydrogen, which are very useful topics to look at. But we believe that the industry needs to look beyond that. It needs to really focus on iron feed units such as scrap and DRI. And these we think are absolutely fundamental to making the journey to a decarbonized future. Both scrap and DRI and related DR pellets are really the choke points for the decarbonization of steel industry. And it's very important that the leadership grasp these and move forward to resolve these issues.
So before we dive deeper into this, can you share some of the basics of these decarbonized steel feeds like scrap and DR grade pellets, and maybe elaborating on the price premium that the steel producers are paying today to have access to these, and how do you see that changing in the future?
Sure. So let me start with scrap. Decarbonization technologies really require high quality scrap. So what do we mean by high quality scrap? First of all, it needs low residual elements like copper, moly, and others. It needs low inert material like plastics or concrete, and it needs high density. Why does decarbonization need this quality? Because better the quality of scrap, lower would be the energy consumption. And what we're seeing is as more scrap gets used, the availability of high quality scrap is going to get difficult. It is already getting very scarce, and it will directionally get even more difficult. And so what this means for steel producers is that relying entirely on scrap as an iron feed for decarbonization is going to get more and more challenging. And you overlay this with steel producers like Nucor and ArcelorMittal, which are now acquiring scrap processing facility. Then it tells you only one thing, that scrap supply is going to get even more difficult, and therefore the steel industry would need to look at alternative sources for iron units.
So it's a great point you make, Sid, and I think that drives us towards DRI as a feed of iron units into the furnaces. And one of the things, Takshi, that I think is important for people to realize is that the world is blessed with DRI grade material, but it's very unequally distributed. There are going to be some winners and losers geographically, and understanding where that sits and how you can access it will drive a lot of the technology you're going to invest in, as well as the time frame over which we can reasonably achieve some of these targets.
That's a very interesting point. I understand you both work on projects globally, but with more emphasis on North America and Europe. Can you share with us what you see happening with this raw material shortage in the future in North America and Europe?
Yeah, Takshi, interesting space for sure. So I think what we see Europe and North America leading the charge in decarbonizing. And so they need investments. they certainly have access to a lot of high-grade material in their own geographies, and that's allowing them to advance in this space quite quickly. And I think Sid can certainly talk to some of the peculiarities here, but it's a very consolidated space with a few major players who have access to this material.
So thanks, Matt. I think you make a very important point around the DR pellet. There are really very few geographies which are blessed with high-quality DR pellet resources. And what do we mean by high-quality DR pellet resource? High Fe content, low gangue content, and it being of a size that allows it to be pelletized. And if you use this to look at different regions, you look at Brazil, which is naturally blessed with all these parameters. Similarly, Sweden, and you've got India. You could also put in Iran into that mix, but it's probably true that due to geopolitical concerns, Iran will not be a supplier of DR pellets. But if you look at the other regions such as Australia, Africa, or CIS, you'd find that either they suffer from very low-grade iron ore, which makes it very difficult or very expensive to beneficiate and move the material at a low cost to seaborne ports. So in Africa, the iron ore is not sufficiently high enough for it to be qualified for DR pellets. There are some new projects such as Simandu being developed. So when we add all of this together, we quickly realize that is how difficult it is for the iron ore industry to deliver the additional 200 million tons of DR pellets that the steel industry is asking it. And this also then is related to the DR pellet premium question. The DR pellet pricing is linked to iron ore 65% prices. The premium is driven by really three factors. One, the cost of beneficiating the ore to 67.5, the cost of pelletizing, and then there is a market shortage factor. Okay? These are the three factors which drive the premium. For the last few years, directionally, that premium has been going in only one direction, that is increase. The iron ore producers have become much more aggressive in increasing the premium, and we see in the future that premium will continue to increase. This, in a way, this has the impact of this is twofold. One, the increase in premium therefore incentivizes more resources to be brought to the market, but it also then increases the cost of decarbonization. So it's a double-edged sword. But regardless, even if with the premiums being on the increase, there's simply not enough resources for the world to decarbonize. And this is something that will become a choke point for the steel industry, and this will then apply the brakes on the decarbonization of the steel industry.
Now that we've identified the bottleneck being the supply of high-grade iron ore and scrap in the future, how do you see the steel producers of today? What is your suggestion for them to tackle this issue in the future?
Yeah, it's certainly going to be challenging, Takshi. And so I think we have, in our minds, three waves of development coming. We've touched really on the first and part of the second wave. The first wave, we believe, is really solved, if you like. It's driven by technology and the adoption of DRI and EAFs. The implication, which we've discussed, is then the shortage on raw materials. So we strongly believe that wave two is the investing in both DRI modules and securing upstream access to iron ore that is of the right grade. And so the first wave is going to be a capital-intensive rush to market. We've seen that already. Government policies and money available, our clients and large industrial firms accessing that capital and initiating really technology-driven projects. That's going to soak up DR grade material. It's going to soak up scrap. That's going to drive premiums up and force people to invest in the limited amount of resources available. So waves 1 and 2, I think, are reasonably well defined and will take us out 5 to 7 years from now, maybe a little bit longer depending on access to capital. I think when it gets really interesting is wave 3. Because wave 3 means how do we bring on all of these lower quality iron ore sources that are so fundamental to the volume we have now. They provide the feed into India, they provide the feed into China, and to a lot of the existing blast furnaces globally. And at some stage, we have to imagine a world where that large volume play starts to decarbonize. And it poses an existential risk to many of the suppliers and geographies in the world. Where we have lower quality blast furnace customized sort of feed, that needs to shift. And we don't know how to do that yet. There are a lot of interesting technologies and a lot of investment being driven that way. Hatch ourselves are spending a lot of time, and you've heard some of our fellow podcasters talk about Hatch's crisp furnace, squarely designed at resolving some of those challenges. It's going to be one of several technologies that we think is leading the way. And so as an investor or as a consumer or a producer of iron ore and steel, you've got to decide which of these waves you're going into. If you've got access to capital, you can jump in now. If you want to make an existential change, you're going to go for the third wave. It's a bit of a gamble, but if you get it right, you're going to undercut all the premiums we're talking about. You're going to have access to a whole bunch more resources, and you're going to really blow open the sector. And so we think that there's a real opportunity to continue the technology investment and to work with partners like us to go for that third wave and take a very cost competitive and market leading position when that third wave comes, because it is inevitable.
Any thoughts on that, Sid?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the three waves that Matt described, they're not independent or discrete pieces. I think they are very well connected to each other. And what I mean by that is that producers do not have a choice of saying, we will participate in wave two, or we will wait for wave two and we'll participate in wave two and develop iron ore reserves. I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. Producers who commit themselves to wave one then have the experience of developing green steel projects. They have the experience of operating DRI modules, and they have the advantage of having an offtake agreement. This then positions them much better, competitively in a much better position to then develop and go into wave two in developing new iron ore reserves for DR pellets. So it is a bit more nuanced than that. And with regard to wave three, I see it playing out in two ways. One is iron ore producers developing technologies which can look at low quality reserves and upgrading them to DR pellet. The other wave I see is of novel iron making technologies. There are roughly around 40-50 different types of novel iron ore technologies, which are in different stages of development. Many of them are at pilot plant stage or even lab scale, which are not conducive for deployment. So this is going to be a long game, which will involve about 10 to 15 years of development. It will involve partnership between iron ore producers, steel producers, and potentially new upstarts, technology upstarts, which can then develop this technology. So it's a very long play. But what it also tells me is that the steel industry will have to then get geared up for a new future. It is no more about managing the operations efficiently. It is now about developing new technologies and developing new capital projects to decarbonize quickly.
Who do you see taking charge in wave 1 and 2?
I think, Takshi, that's a great question. If we look at geographies which have an advantage to take advantage of wave 1 and 2, we look at availability of feed material. We look at utilities such as green energy, natural gas, and hydrogen, and government support in terms of grants or policy. If you look at all from these three angles, then Europe, North America, both the US and Canada are probably the best position to take full advantage of wave 1 and wave 2. And I'd also like to add here that Canada has declared high-grade iron ore as a critical mineral, which is great. So that's emphasize the importance that high-grade iron ore is in the mix of decarbonization. With the exception of these three regions, most of the other regions will face tremendous difficulties in terms of being able to secure the feed as well as the capital to decarbonize. I see many regions such as China, Southeast Asia, and India continuing to build new blast furnaces for the foreseeable future before the regulation starts to become much more stringent, thereby forcing them to start to decarbonize. But overall, it's really North America and Europe which are best positioned to ride wave 1 and wave 2.
And what about wave 3? Maybe Matt, you can chime in.
Yeah, so I think wave 3 is where it gets really interesting, actually. So I think Sid's bang on with who's going to lead the waves in 1 and 2. I think when wave 3 comes along, it's going to be bigger than all the others. It's going to be disruptive, as you say. And I think it's going to really change the way that we think about steel as an industry. I think we forget sometimes, because it's been with us so long, how important steel is. We get lost in a whole bunch of other technologies and ideas, but steel's up there with oil in terms of its impact on our societies and its requirement for the advancing and maturing of our economies. And I think what's going to happen in wave 3 is that we're going to see geopolitics start to play a major role in who's gaining access to what and how technology is shared. And so I'm really excited. It's going to be a great time to be in the steel industry and a great time to think about the implications both for governments, for nations, for economies, and of course for our clients who are right in the middle and have a huge opportunity and a tremendous challenge as they head towards waves 1, 2, and ultimately into 3.
Well, that has been a very interesting conversation today. I appreciate you both taking the time and sharing your knowledge with us. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure our viewers did too. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Takshi. Thank you, Matt.
It's been a pleasure, Takshi, and I look forward to seeing how the sector evolves.
Well, that was a very interesting conversation. I appreciate both Matt and Sid taking the time and joining us today and sharing their knowledge with us. Thank you for joining us on Forging the Future, Decarbonizing the Steel Industry, where we navigate the complexities of iron and steel. We hope today's episode has provided you with valuable insights into the sustainable transformation of the industry. Remember, the path to decarbonization is a collaborative effort, and every step counts towards a greener future. I am your host, Takshi Sachdeva, and along with the entire team at Hatch, we appreciate your engagement and curiosity.